A century of power navigating the global chessboard. For over a century, the United States has held a unique position on the world stage. As a global superpower, its foreign policy has shaped the destiny of nations and the course of history. Understanding US political strategies is crucial to grasping the complexities of international relations. This essay will examine the intricate dance of diplomacy, alliances and rivalries that have defined US interactions with 5 key nations: Russia, China, Iran, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. These relationships, often fraught with tension and shifting alliances, have been shaped by a confluence of factors. Ideological divides, economic interests and security concerns have all played pivotal roles in driving US engagement. From the icy grip of the Cold War to the current era of multipolarity, the US has navigated a constantly evolving global landscape. The US has engaged in a delicate balancing act, forging partnerships, countering threats, and seeking to maintain its position of influence. This essay delves into the historical context, key turning points, and contemporary challenges that have shaped US strategies with these pivotal nations. It analyzes how these relationships have evolved over time, reflecting the changing dynamics of global power. Stakes and strategies, defining the American agenda. At the heart of US foreign policy lies a core set of objectives. Maintaining national security, promoting economic prosperity, and advancing American values have been enduring goals. In pursuing these objectives, the US has employed a range of strategies, from diplomacy and economic engagement to military intervention and covert operations. Each of the 5 countries under consideration presents a unique set of challenges and opportunities for US foreign policy. Russia, with its nuclear arsenal and global ambitions, has been a persistent concern. China's economic rise and growing military might pose a formidable challenge to US hegemony. Iran's pursuit of nuclear capabilities and support for regional proxies have made it a target of US sanctions and military pressure. Egypt and Saudi Arabia, as major players in the Middle East, have been crucial partners in promoting regional stability and countering terrorism. By examining the historical trajectory of these relationships, we can gain insights into the underlying motivations and strategic calculations that have guided US foreign policy. This analysis provides a framework for understanding the complexities of international relations. It highlights the challenges and opportunities facing the United States. Containment on a global scale, alliances and ideologies. The Cold War, a decades-long ideological and geopolitical struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, cast a long shadow over the 20th century. This rivalry profoundly shaped US foreign policy, particularly towards Russia, then the Soviet Union and China. At the heart of US strategy lay the doctrine of containment, aimed at preventing the spread of communism beyond its existing borders. The US embarked on a multifaceted approach to contain Soviet influence. It forged a network of military alliances, most notably the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in Europe. This alliance, established in 1949, committed the US and its Western European allies to collective defense against potential Soviet aggression. In Asia, the US cultivated alliances with Japan, South Korea, and other nations on the periphery of the Soviet Union and China. These alliances served as a bulwark against communist expansion, deterring Soviet aggression through the threat of a unified response. The US also provided economic and military aid to bolster the defenses of its allies, strengthening their resilience against Soviet pressure. This global network of alliances became a cornerstone of US Cold War strategy, extending American influence and containing the spread of communist ideology. The ideological dimension of the Cold War further intensified the rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union. The US championed democracy, capitalism, and individual liberty, contrasting these values with the Soviet system of communism, which it viewed as inherently oppressive and expansionist. This ideological clash framed the Cold War as a battle of ideas, with the US seeking to promote its vision of a free and democratic world. the China card shifting dynamics and triangular diplomacy. As the Cold War progressed, China emerged as a significant factor in the US-Soviet rivalry. Following the communist victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949, the US initially pursued a policy of isolation towards the newly established People's Republic of China. This approach reflected concerns about China's communist ideology and its alliance with the Soviet Union. However, the US gradually recognized the strategic opportunity presented by the Sino-Soviet split, a rift that developed between China and the Soviet Union in the 1960s. This divergence stemmed from ideological differences, geopolitical competition, and personality clashes between their leaders. Recognizing this shift in the communist bloc, the US, under President Richard Nixon, initiated a rapprochement with China in the early 1970s. Nixon's historic visit to China in 1972 marked a pivotal moment in Cold War diplomacy. By normalizing relations with China, the US aimed to exploit the Sino-Soviet split and create a triangular dynamic that would constrain Soviet power. This move, known as triangular diplomacy, sought to leverage China as a counterweight to the Soviet Union, altering the balance of power in the Cold War. The opening to China had profound implications for US foreign policy. It not only shifted the strategic landscape of the Cold War, but also paved the way for future economic and diplomatic engagement with China. This strategic realignment demonstrated the U.S. quote, as willingness to adapt its policies in response to evolving global dynamics. Section 3. Echoes of the Cold War shaping the Middle East landscape. The Cold War's impact extended far beyond the direct confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Middle East, rich in oil and of strategic importance, became a battleground for influence between the two superpowers. Both sides sought to cultivate alliances, support friendly regimes, and undermine their rivals' interests in the region. The United States sought to counter Soviet influence in the Middle East by forging close ties with key regional powers. It cultivated a strong alliance with Saudi Arabia, a crucial oil producer, ensuring access to vital energy resources and limiting Soviet influence in the Arabian Peninsula. The United States also provided military and economic support to other pro-Western regimes in the region, such as Iran under the Shah and Turkey. However, the United States faced challenges in its efforts to contain Soviet influence in the Middle East. The Arab-Israeli conflict created a complex geopolitical landscape, with the Soviet Union often supporting Arab states against Israel, a close US ally. The rise of Arab nationalism, exemplified by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, also posed challenges to US interests. Despite these difficulties, the United States managed to maintain a significant presence in the Middle East throughout the Cold War. It played a key role in mediating the Arab-Israeli conflict and sought to prevent the region from falling under Soviet domination. The Cold War's legacy continues to shape the geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East to this day. Section 1. Black Gold and Security, the US-Saudi Arabian Partnership. The discovery of vast oil reserves in Saudi Arabia in the early 20th century fundamentally reshaped the kingdom's strategic importance. The United States, recognizing the crucial role of oil in global economics and its own energy security, quickly moved to establish strong ties with Saudi Arabia. This relationship, formalized in 1945, became a cornerstone of US policy in the Middle East. The US-Saudi alliance has been characterized as an exchange of security for oil. The United States, through its military presence and security guarantees, ensures the stability of the Saudi regime and protects its oil infrastructure from external threats. In return, Saudi Arabia has been a reliable supplier of oil to global markets, helping to moderate prices and ensure US access to this vital resource. This partnership has granted the United States significant leverage in the global energy market. Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves and its role as a swing producer capable of influencing global supply and prices give it considerable economic and geopolitical clout. By maintaining close ties with Saudi Arabia, The United States has been able to exert influence over global oil markets, impacting the economies of rivals and shaping the geopolitical landscape. However, the US-Saudi relationship has also been marked by challenges. Saudi Arabia's human rights record, its role in the Yemen conflict, and its regional rivalry with Iran have all strained the alliance at times. Despite these tensions, the United States continues to view Saudi Arabia as a crucial partner in the Middle East, essential for maintaining regional stability, countering Iranian influence, and safeguarding global energy security. Section 2, the Shah, the Revolution, and Shifting Sands, the US and Iran. The United States' relationship with Iran has been one of the most tumultuous in its recent history. Following World War II, the United States supported the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, viewing him as a bulwark against Soviet expansionism in the region. The United States provided Iran with substantial military and economic aid, bolstering the Shah's regime and strengthening its military capabilities. Iran, under the Shah, became a key US ally in the Middle East, forming one half of the Twin Pillars policy, alongside Saudi Arabia. This policy aimed at containing Soviet influence and maintaining regional stability. Iran's strategic location, bordering the Soviet Union and controlling the Strait of Hormuz, a vital waterway for global oil shipments, made it a crucial partner for the United States. However, the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which overthrew the Shah and established an Islamic Republic, dramatically altered the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The new Iranian regime, led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, was deeply anti-American, viewing the United States as a supporter of the deposed Shah and an enemy of Islam. The hostage crisis at the US Embassy in Tehran, where American diplomats were held captive for over a year, further poisoned relations between the two countries. The Iranian Revolution marked a turning point in US-Iran relations, transforming a close ally into a staunch adversary. This shift had profound implications for US policy in the Middle East, as Iran's new regime actively sought to export its Islamic Revolution and challenge US influence in the region. This rivalry has continued to this day, shaping the dynamics of the Middle East and posing ongoing challenges for US foreign policy. From foe to partner, Egypt's pivotal role in US Middle East strategy. Egypt, a major power in the Arab world, has played a complex and evolving role in US Middle East policy. Under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt pursued a neutralist foreign policy during the Cold War, accepting aid from both the Soviet Union and the United States. However, Nasser's pan-Arabism and his close ties with the Soviet Union made him a source of concern for the US. The 1973 Yom Kippur War, in which Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel, further strained US-Egypt relations. However, this conflict also created an opportunity for a diplomatic breakthrough. The US, under President Jimmy Carter, played a key role in mediating the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, culminating in the Camp David Accords of 1978. The Camp David Accords were a watershed moment in Middle East diplomacy. Egypt became the first Arab country to recognize Israel, and the Accords paved the way for a peace treaty between the two nations. This historic agreement, brokered by the US, transformed Egypt from a potential adversary into a key partner in the region. Egypt's strategic significance, its large population, its control of the Suez Canal, and its influence in the Arab world made it a valuable ally for the US-Egypt's shift towards the US camp, also dealt a blow to Soviet influence in the region, further bolstering US strategic interests. Balancing act, managing competing interests and regional dynamics. US policy in the Middle East has often involved a delicate balancing act, navigating complex relationships with allies and adversaries alike. The region's volatility, its strategic importance, and the interplay of competing interests have made it a constant focus of US foreign policy. The US has sought to maintain its influence in the Middle East by supporting friendly regimes, providing military and economic aid, and engaging in diplomatic efforts to resolve regional conflicts. However, this approach has often been criticized for propping up authoritarian regimes, fueling regional arms races, and entangling the U.S. in intractable conflicts. The U.S. has also faced challenges in balancing its relationships with different Middle Eastern powers. For example, its close ties with Israel have sometimes created tensions with Arab allies. Similarly, its support for Saudi Arabia has drawn criticism for aligning the U.S. with a regime accused of human rights abuses. Despite these challenges, the U.S. continues to view the Middle East as a region of vital importance. Its strategic location, its vast energy resources, and its role as a hub for global trade make it a key area of interest for the U.S. The U.S. remains committed to promoting stability, countering terrorism, and safeguarding its interests in the Middle East, even as it grapples with the region's complexities and the challenges of balancing competing priorities. The bear awakens: Russia's resurgence and U.S. containment efforts. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a turning point in international relations, ending the Cold War and ushering in a period of U.S. primacy. Initially, the U.S. sought to integrate Russia into the international system, supporting its democratic transition and economic reforms. However, as Russia recovered from its post-Soviet turmoil, its assertive foreign policy under President Vladimir Putin brought it into increasing conflict with U.S. interests. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its military intervention in eastern Ukraine signaled a more assertive Russia, willing to use military force to pursue its geopolitical objectives. The U.S. responded by imposing sanctions on Russia and bolstering its military presence in Eastern Europe, seeking to deter further Russian aggression and reassure NATO allies. The U.S. also expanded NATO eastward, incorporating former Soviet satellites in Central and Eastern Europe. This expansion, while aimed at deterring Russia, was perceived by Moscow as a betrayal of Western promises and a threat to its security interests. The U.S. argued that NATO expansion was necessary to protect new democracies from Russian pressure, while Russia viewed it as a provocative encirclement strategy. The U.S. and Russia also clashed over issues such as Syria, cybersecurity, and election interference. The U.S. accused Russia of supporting the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, interfering in U.S. elections, and conducting cyber attacks against Western institutions. These tensions led to a deterioration of U.S.-Russia relations, reaching levels of mistrust and hostility reminiscent of the Cold War. Section 2. The Dragon's Ascent: China's Economic Rise and Strategic Competition. While Russia presented a resurgent geopolitical challenge, China emerged as a more complex and multifaceted competitor. China's rapid economic growth, fueled by its integration into the global economy, transformed it into a global economic powerhouse, challenging U.S. economic dominance. The U.S. initially welcomed China's economic rise, viewing it as an opportunity for trade and investment. However, China's growing economic might, its state-led capitalism, and its ambitions for technological dominance raised concerns in Washington. The U.S. accused China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and currency manipulation, leading to trade disputes and tariffs. Beyond economics, China's growing military capabilities and its assertive posture in the South China Sea heightened concerns about its strategic ambitions. China's military modernization, its development of advanced weapons systems, and its island-building activities in disputed waters challenged U.S. military dominance in the Asia-Pacific region. The U.S. responded to China's rise by pivoting its strategic focus towards the Asia-Pacific, strengthening alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. The U.S. also increased its military presence in the region, conducting naval exercises and deploying advanced military assets to counter China's growing influence. The U.S.-China relationship became increasingly competitive, characterized by rivalry in trade, technology, and geopolitics. The U.S. sought to maintain its global leadership while accommodating China's rise, a delicate balancing act that required a nuanced and multifaceted approach. Section 3. A new Great Game strategic resource competition in the Middle East. The post-Cold War era witnessed a resurgence of great power competition, with the Middle East remaining a focal point of strategic rivalry. The region's vast energy resources, its strategic location, and its complex web of alliances and conflicts made it an arena for competition between the US, Russia, and China. China's growing energy demands, fueled by its economic expansion, made it increasingly reliant on Middle Eastern oil and gas. China sought to secure access to these resources by cultivating ties with oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. This growing Chinese presence in the Middle East challenged US energy dominance and its ability to influence regional dynamics. Russia, despite its economic weaknesses, remained a major player in the Middle East, leveraging its military capabilities and its alliances with Syria and Iran to project power. Russia's intervention in the Syrian civil war, its arms, sales to regional actors, and its diplomatic maneuvering aimed at expanding its influence and countering US interests. The US, while seeking to reduce its reliance on Middle Eastern oil, remained committed to protecting its interests in the region. The US maintained its military presence in the Persian Gulf, strengthened its alliances with countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel, and sought to counter Iranian influence. The confluence of great power interests in the Middle East created a complex and volatile environment where competition for resources, influence, and strategic advantage fueled regional instability. Section 4. Shifting sands the Middle East as an arena for multipolar competition. The Middle East in the 21st century became a stage for multipolar competition, with regional powers like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey vying for influence alongside the US, Russia, and China. This multipolarity made it increasingly challenging for the US to shape the region's trajectory, requiring a recalibration of its strategy and a recognition of the limits of its power. Iran, despite facing economic sanctions and international pressure, remained a major regional power, leveraging its support for proxy groups in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq to project influence. Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile development, and its regional activities posed a significant challenge to US interests and its allies in the region. Saudi Arabia, a long-standing US ally, adopted a more assertive foreign policy, intervening in Yemen's civil war, engaging in a regional rivalry with Iran, and diversifying its partnerships beyond the US-Saudi Arabia's growing economic and political clout gave it greater leverage in its relationship with the US. Turkey, under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, pursued a more independent foreign policy, seeking to assert its influence in the eastern Mediterranean, Syria, and Libya. Turkey's growing military capabilities, its strategic location, and its complex relationship with the West made it a wildcard in regional dynamics. The US faced a complex and evolving landscape in the Middle East, where traditional alliances were being tested, new actors were emerging, and the dynamics of power were shifting. This required a more nuanced and flexible approach, one that recognized the limits of US power and the need for cooperation with both allies and rivals to address common challenges. Section 1. Shared threats, diverging approaches, Iran in the crosshairs. In the contemporary Middle East, few issues unite the US and its regional allies as strongly as the perceived threat from Iran. Iran's nuclear ambitions, its support for armed groups across the region, and its ballistic missile program have long been sources of concern for the US and its partners in the Middle East, including Israel and Saudi Arabia. The US views Iran's regional activities as destabilizing. It sees Tehran's pursuit of nuclear weapons capability as a direct threat to international security. This shared threat perception has led to a range of collaborative efforts. The US has provided its Middle Eastern allies with advanced military hardware, intelligence sharing, and joint military exercises. This cooperation aims to bolster their defenses and deter potential Iranian aggression. However, despite this united front against Iran, differences in strategy and approach have emerged. The US has primarily relied on sanctions and diplomatic pressure to curb Iran's nuclear program and regional influence. The Trump administration's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, or JCPOA, in 2018, and the reimposition of sanctions exemplified this approach. However, this strategy has been met with mixed results. While sanctions have undoubtedly hurt the Iranian economy, they have also fueled anti-American sentiment within Iran and emboldened hardliners. Furthermore, the U.S. quote, "Middle Eastern allies, while sharing the goal of containing Iran, often favor more hawkish approaches. Some have advocated for military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or more direct confrontation with Iranian proxies. This divergence in strategy highlights the delicate balancing act the US faces in managing these relationships. It must address shared concerns while also navigating the particular interests and risk tolerances of its allies." Section 2. The newcomers at the table. China and Russia's Middle Eastern inroads. The Middle East, once considered the almost exclusive domain of US influence, has witnessed the growing presence of other global powers, particularly China and Russia. This development reflects a broader trend of multipolarity in international relations as rising powers seek to assert themselves on the global stage. Both China and Russia view the Middle East as strategically important. They have sought to expand their influence through a combination of economic engagement, diplomatic outreach, and military cooperation. China's approach to the Middle East has been primarily economic. As the world's second-largest economy and a major energy consumer, China has sought to secure access to the region's vast oil and gas reserves. China has become a major trading partner for many Middle Eastern countries, investing heavily in infrastructure projects through its Belt and Road Initiative. This economic statecraft has allowed China to build relationships and expand its influence without directly challenging the US militarily. Russia, while lacking China's economic might, has leveraged its military capabilities and its willingness to engage in regional conflicts to enhance its standing. Russia's military intervention in the Syrian civil war in support of the Assad regime demonstrated its ability to project power far beyond its borders. This intervention has allowed Russia to reassert itself as a major player in the Middle East. It has also provided Moscow with strategic leverage in its dealings with the US and its allies. The growing influence of China and Russia in the Middle East presents both challenges and opportunities for the US. On the one hand, their presence complicates the regional landscape. It potentially undermines US efforts to shape events according to its interests. On the other hand, their involvement could also create opportunities for cooperation on issues of mutual concern, such as counterterrorism or non-proliferation. Section 3. Economic coercion and strategic undermining, sanction standoffs, and energy politics. The United States has often employed economic sanctions as a tool of foreign policy, seeking to pressure adversaries like Iran and Russia without resorting to military force. However, this strategy has become increasingly complex in a multipolar world. Both China and Russia have demonstrated a willingness to undermine US sanctions, providing a lifeline to targeted regimes and challenging the effectiveness of unilateral US actions. In the case of Iran, China has emerged as a crucial economic partner, defying US sanctions to continue purchasing Iranian oil. This trade relationship provides Iran with a vital source of revenue and weakens the impact of US economic pressure. Moreover, China has shown little interest in supporting US-led efforts to isolate Iran diplomatically. It often opposes US resolutions against Iran in international forums like the United Nations Security Council. Russia has also engaged in efforts to blunt the impact of US sanctions, both against Iran and against itself. Russia has developed alternative payment systems to circumvent the US-dominated SWIFT financial messaging system, reducing its vulnerability to financial sanctions. Additionally, Russia has deepened its economic ties with Iran, exploring barter arrangements and currency swaps to facilitate trade outside the purview of US sanctions. These actions highlight the limitations of economic coercion in a multipolar world. When major powers like China and Russia choose to disregard or actively subvert US sanctions, their effectiveness is significantly diminished. This dynamic underscores the need for the United States to reassess its reliance on sanctions as a primary foreign policy tool and explore alternative approaches to achieve its objectives. Section 4. Navigating a tangled web. Balancing alliances in an age of multipolarity. The United States faces a complex balancing act in managing its relationships with its Middle Eastern allies in the face of growing multipolarity. These relationships, forged during a different era, are being tested by shifting geopolitical realities, diverging security priorities, and the emergence of new partnerships. The US has long maintained close security ties with countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt, providing them with military aid, arms sales, and security guarantees. However, these relationships have come under increasing scrutiny, both domestically and internationally. Critics argue that the US has turned a blind eye to human rights abuses and undemocratic practices by its allies in the name of security. Furthermore, the U.S. Middle Eastern partners are increasingly diversifying their relationships, hedging their bets in a multipolar world. Saudi Arabia, while maintaining its alliance with the US, has also deepened its ties with China and Russia, seeking new markets for its oil and exploring opportunities for military cooperation. Similarly, other US allies in the region, such as the United Arab Emirates, have engaged in diplomatic and economic outreach to both Beijing and Moscow. This evolving geopolitical landscape requires the US to adapt its approach. Simply relying on Cold War-era security arrangements is no longer sufficient. The US must find ways to align its interests with those of its allies, while also acknowledging their evolving priorities and their pursuit of greater strategic autonomy. This balancing act will require a nuanced and flexible approach, one that combines traditional security partnerships with economic engagement and diplomatic dialogue. The US must demonstrate that it remains a reliable and valuable partner, even as its allies explore new relationships and assert their independence in a multipolar world. Section 1. A New World Disorder: Complexity and the Limits of Power. The 21st century has ushered in an era of unprecedented complexity in international relations. The United States, while still a global superpower, can no longer dictate the terms of global order as it once did. The rise of China, the resurgence of Russia, and the growing assertiveness of regional powers have created a multipolar world where power is more diffuse and the outcomes of geopolitical competition are less predictable. This new world disorder presents profound challenges for US foreign policy. The strategies that served the US well during the Cold War and its immediate aftermath are no longer adequate to address the complexities of a multipolar system. The US can no longer rely solely on its military might or its economic leverage to achieve its objectives. It must adapt to a world where diplomacy, strategic partnerships, and a nuanced understanding of regional dynamics are paramount. The relationships between the US, Russia, China, Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia exemplify this new reality. These relationships are characterized by a complex interplay of cooperation, competition, and rivalry. Shared interests, such as counterterrorism or non-proliferation, often coexist with deep disagreements over regional security, economic policy, and political values. In this environment, the US must carefully calibrate its policies, recognizing that actions taken in one area can have unintended consequences in others. For example, pressuring China on trade may lead Beijing to strengthen its ties with Iran, undermining US efforts to contain Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Similarly, supporting Saudi Arabia's military intervention in Yemen could exacerbate regional tensions and create opportunities for Iranian influence. Section 2. The American Century and its Discontents: Charting a Course Through Turbulent Waters. The United States has played a dominant role in shaping the international order for much of the past century. However, the American century, as it has been called, is giving way to a more uncertain and contested future. The US faces a fundamental choice. It can cling to a nostalgic vision of unipolarity, seeking to reassert its dominance through military strength and unilateral action. Or it can embrace the realities of a multipolar world and pursue a more collaborative and adaptive approach to global leadership. The former path, while tempting to some, is likely to prove counterproductive. In a world of rising powers and interconnected challenges, unilateralism and military interventionism are more likely to provoke resistance and instability than to achieve lasting solutions. The US cannot solve global problems alone, nor can it impose its will on a world that is increasingly resistant to such dictates. A more promising path lies in embracing the principles of multilateralism, diplomacy, and strategic restraint. The US should leverage its considerable diplomatic skills, its network of alliances, and its capacity for innovation to build a more stable, prosperous, and just world order. This approach requires a shift in mindset. The US must move away from zero-sum thinking and recognize that its interests are often best served by finding common ground with other nations, even those with whom it has significant disagreements. This requires a willingness to compromise, to listen to the perspectives of others, and to build relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests. The challenges facing the US in the 21st century are formidable, but they are not insurmountable. By embracing the complexities of a multipolar world and pursuing a more collaborative and adaptive foreign policy, the US can continue to play a leading role in shaping a more peaceful and prosperous future for all.